T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
12 miles. Now contact approaching 5 miles. Contact 70 miles, final break. 230. Mile and a half.
Single contact. 6,000. Speed 350. 340.
And your release about 118.
Heads up. It's 30 west south.
Team.
1 Alpha has 2 contacts. 166 at 11. Angels 5.
Welcome to episode 3 of the O.S.I.R.I.S project. Today we are joined by Father Christopher Corbally from the Vatican Observatory. We will discuss why the Vatican has an observatory after an apparent shunning of science, as well as what they are researching and how their discoveries may affect doctrine. Join us now for episode 3, the Vatican Observatory. All right, folks, welcome back to episode 3. This is a very special episode. We have, as I said, both Father Corbally and Professor Matthew Shadagas. Father Corbally is a Jesuit priest on the research staff of the Vatican Observatory and an adjunct professor at the University of Arizona. He principally uses spectroscopy to investigate the evolution of stars, and he's a co-author for the comprehensive volume Stellar Spectral Classification. He was the project scientist for the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope on Mount Graham, Arizona, as well. And a longtime interest in interdisciplinary questions has led to his co-authorship with Dr. Margaret Boone Rappaport of the recent book, The Emergence of Religion in Human Evolution. So, without further ado, let's bring in Father Christopher Corbally of the Vatican Observatory and Professor Matthew Shadagas of UAPX. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you, Jeremy, and Matthew too.
And
Yes.
Nice to meet you, Father.
Yes. So Matthew, this is Father Christopher Corbally. Christopher,
Nice.
This is Matthew Shadagas. Matthew is one of our physicists on staff at UAPX.
Pleasure
So.
to meet you, Father. I'm the only practicing Catholic, or probably the only religious person on my department of physics. Everyone else is an atheist. Yeah.
Well, neat, but I think it's a myth, as someone whom you've met, Brother Guy Consolmagno, that
Yes.
that physicists are low in believers. No, I don't think so.
Well, in my department, it's true, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, you should come here to the Department of Astronomy in Arizona. Yeah.
You know, it is interesting. I this wasn't the direction I was going to take initially with this interview, but I was watching a little snippet from an interview that had you and a few other folks on, Father, that was done by the BBC, and I can't remember the gentleman's name.
Lawrence Krauss.
Krauss?
Mm-hmm.
And he made a statement that kind of, I could see how it would be offensive to some, that he said that the best scientists are atheists. And that struck me as very odd, because I never even, I wouldn't consider it, but how is that specific statement received within the scientific community of the church?
It's ignored.
Fair enough.
Quite honestly, and you'll see from that, I think it was called a pop-up or something, program on the BBC, 5 minutes or so. And
Yeah, it was a very small clip,
and you could kind of see it from there. Actually, Lawrence Krauss was extremely well answered by the director of the Department of Astronomy. We're here in the University of Arizona in Tucson. And the director of the department, Bill Januzzi, I think answered Krauss extremely well. Said, no, that's nonsense.
Yes, I believe he did as well. And in full disclosure, I was raised Roman Catholic, and I think I'm certainly not an atheist in any way, shape, or form. I would probably classify myself more as an agnostic because I do believe something is there, but I'm not yet convinced on what that something is, and I don't even know if I would possess the ability to understand what it is, even with the ability of being presented with all the facts and evidence.
Jeremy, join every believer who's honest. And certainly join every theologian who's honest about their God talk. We can't put it in words.
I mean, even Richard Dawkins says on a level of 0 to 7, he's a level 6 atheist because he says it's not scientific to claim you know something with 100% certainty.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
So Father Corbally, before we get into the why, what, when, and how, let's talk a little bit about where we are now with this conversation in atheism and science and religion. How does one who has a very, very strong belief in a specific doctrine or dogma, how does one ensure that belief structure, that personal belief structure, does not affect in a bias towards the output of scientific research? I understand that if it's mathematics, that is a finite calculation and very difficult to skew one way or the other. But if it's research and interpretation, how does somebody with a strong belief ensure that there is a separation between the hard science and what the researcher may want the output to become?
Oh, well, yes, so this is different from kind of faith affecting science. I suppose, I think, isn't that right? You're not asking the question of faith affecting science, is that right?
Not necessarily faith affecting science, but how do you keep your personal faith from affecting your bias in the writing of the results?
Because the questions are different. The ultimate question, one of faith and of God, is different from the questions of science, which is how does it work? And how does it work? The answer is not God. Why is it there anyway? The answer is God. But how does it work? That's the question of physics, and of the sciences, chemistry, biology, or the rest of them. So it's a different question, and that's why the one doesn't affect the other. Faith can enjoy the finding out of how it works, and in some ways find that maybe one has a share in God's delight, the Creator's delight in creation, by finding out how it works. But it's not the question of why it's there at all.
Interesting. Matthew?
Yeah, if I could add to that, I do think I might have a bias, even if it's subconscious, but it's not going to be what you think. And I would love, of course, Father Corbally to weigh in on what I'm about to say as well. But I feel like I might have a subconscious bias towards the universe being understandable. So Albert Einstein once said, well, many quotes are attributed to Einstein. I don't know if this is apocryphal, but he says the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. So the only way I could see my beliefs or religiosity in any way influencing my approach is just in this one way, which is that I am biased to think that the universe is logical and comprehensible for the reason that because of my belief in God, and that I believe God created a universe that's rational and can be understood by humans. In other words, you don't wake up tomorrow and general relativity doesn't work anymore. Gravity doesn't work and we fly off the Earth. Or, thermodynamics, the laws of entropy change and suddenly you die of suffocation. We could have lived in a universe like that, but we don't. And to me, so the way religion motivates me, it is still primarily separate, like Father Corbally said, but the one exception I could think of is I'm motivated to think the universe is rational and understandable. And part of it is because, it says in scripture that God is not evil and there is no evil in him. So that's why I think he didn't trick us, and that things like, age of the universe, fossils and things like that are there for us to discover and for human beings to understand.
Oh, but Matthew, may I play the devil's advocate?
Of course.
Appropriate role, of course.
Yeah.
Doesn't the atheist, agnostic, have the same belief in the rationality, discovery of the rationality of material things around us?
Not necessarily. Not always, not every atheist I know, but you're right. I would say that to me then, the source of that rationality is different, because the way I look at it is, as a scientist, either the laws of physics are eternal and the universe could have come from nothing, or there's an eternal creator that made said laws. And so the way I look at it is the source of the rationality is different. But you make an excellent point.
No, that's wonderful. So the source, I suppose the source of an atheist's rationality is the fact it's worked so far.
Yeah. See, but then the difference for me is I have faith it will continue to work. I can't prove it, but I have faith that the rationality of the universe will continue. Yeah.
And see, for me, I just don't know. I simply just don't know. I find it very, very difficult to comprehend how everything could be eternal. And I also find it very hard to comprehend how everything isn't eternal at the exact same time. So I literally have zero understanding as far as I think I know what I want to believe, but and politics aside, Rudy Giuliani had a quote that has stuck with me for a very long time, and he says, "Know what you believe." And I am on a personal quest to try to know what I believe, but I don't want my beliefs to affect the way that I'm trying to find answers to things.
Yeah, to bias it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is fantastic, and I appreciate this conversation. But I think one of my biggest burning questions, and I need to preface this by saying that my questions are not designed to be insultative or any other type of interrogatory type of approach. I am asking questions from an outside perspective based on what I see happening or what I have seen happening through my eyes and through my understanding. And that may well be flawed, but it is what is in my head, and probably many others that are very curious. And we have the assumption, and it may be a wrong assumption, but we have the assumption that throughout history, long time ago, that it seems as if the Catholic Church, or churches in general, for that matter, have had a very tenuous relationship with science and education in general. And what I said in the preview for the trailer for the show is that it seemed as if there was a shunning of science to an effect. I mean, Galileo, for example. So why is the Catholic Church operating an observatory? Let's just jump right into that.
Well, back a bit, Jeremy, in your question, the church and, kind of science, and certainly knowledge and understanding, certainly quite a valid claim can be made that the reason that why knowledge kept going through the Middle Ages and even the Dark Ages was in monasteries. So it was the learning, of monks and church people that kept the knowledge going. So I think you wouldn't say that the church is, against intellectual knowledge. It's a question of this newfangled thing, science, and that was sort of based on experimentation rather than philosophy. This is something that we are incredibly used to, science and what is science. Putting oneself back in the sort of, late medieval ages, the beginning of the modern ages, is a difficult one for us because we don't have that sort of historical viewpoint. So the transition from your mind, your philosophy, tells you what's going on. The kind of from the Greeks, maybe Plato, what's called idealism, that all knowledge is from our mind and the ideals, to maybe more Aristotle, that it's out there in nature, and it's being able to then, how do we interact with nature in order to find out not just the phenomenon, what happens, but why it happens. So what's behind it? That's a great transition. And it is obviously in Galileo's days that the experimentation was, coming to the fore. So Galileo is actually a better, promoter of the physics, the dynamics, the moving bodies, than he was actually of, astronomy.
Sure.
What is known is that his proofs of the sun being the center of our solar system, not the Earth, were not actually proofs. They were wonderful, insight and, as it were, guesses, but there wasn't any physical proof for that. That didn't come till, 200 years later? So when our measurements could be precise enough to show that, yes, it was the Earth that was moving around the sun, not the sun around the Earth. But that took a long time for the precision to come. It was a great, insight, but it actually wasn't, good science. And people at that time knew there was a flaw in, as it were, the experimental science of Galileo. His, falling bodies, his motion, gravity, those were wonderful. And at least he spent a little time locked up in his own house and able to finish that important aspect of his work. But so you see what I mean? It's a transition that we find very hard to understand. And so we'll need to be very careful about condemning the people of the time for not being able to make that transition as readily as we can.
So it's not necessarily the doctrine or dogma of the church that would lash out at new ideas or new guesses, as you were saying, but it was more the mentality of the people that were speaking of the time.
I think so. Before that upstart Galileo came on the scene and thought he knew all about our solar system. So we're actually going back into the 16th century, and more precisely 1582. The Catholic Church promulgated the calendar system that we are now using at the time. So it used observational astronomy to give us our current calendar. What they were then operating on, over 400 years ago, nearly 450 years ago, was a calendar inherited from Julius Caesar, which again for the time was incredibly good, but it didn't quite have the length of our year correct. And so what was happening is that the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter, were getting out of step with the calendar date. And for the Catholic Church, that was a problem, because what was happening, the date of Easter in the Northern Hemisphere was shifting back into winter time, whereas it is an Easter feast, a feast of new life in Christ, the resurrected Christ. So that was a problem for the church, and that's why the church brought in mathematicians and scientists, among whom was one Jesuit, to advise on how to reform the calendar. It was Pope Gregory XIII, as I say, 1582, who promulgated the calendar that we're using at the moment, the Gregorian calendar. So in a sense, science was there, but it was a time of transition. It was only obviously the beginning of the 1600s that Galileo came on the scene with his great insight of what might be, how our solar system was made up.
Interesting. So, yes, go ahead, Matthew.
Jeremy, I'd like to add about the, Father Corbally mentioned about guesses. So you have to keep in mind, with Galileo's original, I've learned a lot about the Galileo story from Brother Guy, actually. He came and gave a seminar, a public seminar about Galileo, and talked about the facts. And there's been like hundreds of books written on the subject. And what one has to acknowledge is that you can't, the heliocentric model as originally stated actually doesn't work better than the Ptolemaic model, because if you assume planets' orbits are circles, your answers are nowhere near as good as Ptolemy with his epicycles. It doesn't fit the data. It's not until you get Kepler and we let go of this, like, oh, it has to be circle, it has to be perfect, and we get elliptical orbits, bam, suddenly now the heliocentric model actually is better than the geocentric.
So are you saying it's fair to, maybe not fair, but it was more acceptable to question harder Galileo because his imperfect guesses still weren't correct?
That's right. So there's no excuse, and Pope John Paul II already apologized about the whole Galileo thing. I know it was a few centuries late, but still, Pope John Paul II, one of my personal heroes. But the thing is that it still doesn't excuse everything that happened. Brother Guy says this, but you have to understand the scientific context and also the historical context. You had the Protestant Reformation, and the church needed to look hard and look like it was ultra-conservative, and so it had to come down hard on Galileo. So that doesn't excuse it, but this is what I learned from Brother Guy, is that you need to look at that context. And also you can't look at the church history, as Father Corbally was saying. Look, it's not some linear thing where it's like, oh, it was anti-science for this time, and then bam, suddenly it changed in the 20th century. There's ebb and flow of historical and cultural differences. For example, when I give my talk on faith and science, I trick a lot of people. I take a quote from St. Augustine. I actually take an entire paragraph from St. Augustine where he talks about evolution and animals, land animals coming from fish. And I'm like, who said this? Was it Richard Dawkins, Charles Darwin? And the entire audience gets it wrong. It's St. Augustine. And you should see the jaws drop in the audience. I'm like, yeah, St. Augustine was talking about evolution millennia before Darwin. Okay, so then, and St. Augustine, of course, one of the heroes of Catholicism, of Christianity in general. So I don't think history is not a linear process of constantly changing in one direction. So one cannot say a binary statement, oh, the church was against learning or science, and then suddenly it wasn't, when I just gave you this great example from St. Augustine, who I should also add, I quoted this in my talk. He also has a paragraph making fun of people who take Genesis literally. He says, oh, of course, it's not 7 actual days. Only an idiot would believe that. He says that, okay? This is St. Augustine, okay? St. Augustine, he was the 300s, I believe. Okay, it took 3 digits to say the year, right? This was long before the year 1000. St. Augustine was writing this millennia ago.
So do you think it would be fair to say that the church in general has less of a persecution problem and more of a public relations problem because the message doesn't come to me?
I think I'll let Father Corbally take that one.
I think that's true. And you're also, true that there was, a great sluggishness to transition from, the the Aristotelian view of things, and the earth as a center, and there was, and the, literal interpretation of the Bible. Again, what Matthew was saying about that Augustine was criticizing. There was, that transition took a time within the church, and there were church people who were, kind of stuck in the past, as it was, well as ones that were heading, for current modern science. So among, the Jesuits in the 17th century, so the 1600s, the ones who certainly, kind of realized that Galileo had the right picture of our solar system and the universe as a whole, but weren't allowed to teach it, but they certainly thought it was correct. But then you come into the question of personalities and the fact that Galileo is the kind of person, and we all know that kind of person, who simply has to win an argument and doesn't endear himself to everyone in that way. So there was obviously some opposition between the Jesuits and Galileo, and it was just a personality thing. But as far as the what they thought and then what they taught was different. So what they'd say, this is for the exam, but this is what I think, kind of thing, in class. Maybe one goes on a little today.
So this is absolutely fantastic, and it reinforces my question that I'm asking is, why does the Vatican operate an observatory? And I had, in all honesty, I had a preconceived idea for my answer, but now that is mostly erased. So I would love to hear the official reasons for why the Vatican operates not one, but I believe two observatories, one in Vatican City and one here.
Not quite, no. It's one observatory, two locations.
Okay.
The universe is big, so why not have lots of locations? But, multiverses or multi-locations for the one observatory, the Vatican Observatory. We have headquarters near Rome, as you'd expect, Castel Gandolfo now, but it started in the city of the city of the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
And then since the early 1980s, we've had this research base, so also part of the observatory, but a research base hosted by the University of Arizona in Tucson. So that's the kind of thing. But your original question, why? Well, there's a tradition there. And the church is good on tradition, and the tradition does go back to what I was speaking about, the reform of the calendar under Pope Gregory XIII, our Gregorian calendar now. And so, the church in astronomy, the astronomy was one of the subjects taught at medieval universities. Astronomy, just kind of what kind of astronomy, there we go. But it was there. So it's there. And these were church-run, universities. So these, for the main part, or religion-run universities, so astronomy was there. It's part of the curriculum. So in the Vatican's university in Rome, which is now the Gregorian University, but it was called the Roman College for a long time, astronomy was part of the curriculum. And there would arise one of the faculty members, often a Jesuit, who would get a real enthusiasm for observational astronomy and establish a little observatory. And, like any enthusiasm, it would kind of wane when the person passed on. And then it would resurrect again as things, with a later person. So it's kind of that up and down active participation in, observational astronomy research at the Church's University in Rome, the Roman College initially.
Interesting.
So it's that kind of thing, a presence, a definite presence of astronomy, but coming and going as the enthusiasm of a particular person came and went.
So is the observatory structured more for practical applications, for teaching and informing students, or is it and forgive my terminology, it's for lack of a better word, a legitimate research institution.
Yeah, it's a research institution. Just to go on a little bit of the story of the Roman College, just to show that in the middle of the 19th century, so actually 1850 precisely, a Jesuit was appointed director of the Observatory of the Roman College. His name was Father Angelo Secchi, and he was an incredible pioneer in what is now modern astronomy. Before then, it had been positions, more astrometry, the measuring of positions and brightness of objects in the heavens. With Angelo Secchi and his like, astronomy became physics. It became astrophysics, the understanding of what are stars, what are planets made of. Angelo Secchi had the wonderful, thought experiment. What would it be like to stand on Mars? And we're still wondering ourselves, but obviously with our probes getting a better idea. So what is Mars really like, rather than where is it in the sky? So this transition. So Angelo Secchi, a prominent member of the, Roman College, towards his later years, that Rome came, as it were, conquered by the Italian. And so the observatory fell into the Italian government hands, and the Vatican no longer had an observatory. A little bit later, in 1891, Pope Leo, now the 13th, re-established the Vatican Observatory, basically in its current form. First in Vatican City, in the 1930s, is able to establish outside of Rome and away from Rome lights at Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome. And then, as I say, in early 1980s, again, because of the light pollution around Castel Gandolfo, we have our research base here in Arizona. So a kind of continuous, line from when Leo reestablished it, late 19th century, to current day observatory, established for research, back to your original question. Yeah. So it's research, though obviously, Jesuits tend to be teachers. Teachers will be I've taught here at the University of Arizona. There's one of our staff member, actually the vice director here now, Father Paul Gabor, teaching a class here at a course here at the University of Arizona. So yeah.
So where does the research hierarchy of needs, I guess you would call it, come from? Who dictates what is going to be studied and for how long and things like that? I'll let you answer that part. Who tells the observatory what needs to be studied?
No one.
Okay.
So the old idea of the observatory was you had the director, and it was very hierarchical, just like the church. The director had a project, and everyone else, the staff, did that project. Wonderful. And the director's name was the first on any papers that came out, and that is how it happened. That's the old idea. Current idea is that people have their various backgrounds, training, expertises within astronomy. They have a network of colleagues beyond our observatory, and so they do what best suits them. Them and their colleagues are best suited for and interested in. So there's a whole variety of projects. These, you get the blessing of the director, which has to be, that this is a good project. Yes, I believe, yes, you should pursue that. Why not think a bit about doing more work on this line, with these set of colleagues you have, so, the director can still, make those, directions, a suggestion for movement, but really it's the person who comes in with a certain certain training in a branch of astronomy and a network of colleagues.
Is the observatory fully funded by the Catholic Church?
Yes and no, being a good answer. Our day-to-day thing, operations and our travel and conferences are fully funded by the Vatican. Our telescope here in Arizona is not, and that's funded through private donations and foundations. So that's the difference. And yes, we're always looking for funds to do that and to make upgrades and all the rest of it.
Well, before the end of the show, let's talk about that, and let you tell me where we can send people that are interested in donating to the observatory to keep it running. So please remind me, and we'll get that right at the end, and I'll put it in the links in the descriptions when this goes out on YouTube.
Thanks, yeah, because we do rely on.
Yeah. I donated a bit, and I got a calendar.
Oh, you did. Good.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
Was it a Gregorian calendar?
No, but the calendar example is a really good one. Actually, that before we got too far away from that, I wanted to jump in about how the church was utilizing science, okay, then and how critical it was, even though it was in the context, as Father Corbally said, of setting the correct date of the holidays like Easter. But also, I wanted to come back to the point of astronomy versus just astrometrics. Exactly. So one thing I always teach my students when I teach astronomy is how you had the divorce occurred between astronomy and astrology, and it started with Kepler and proceeded forward the coming centuries, and it was because we had Newton's laws of motion and Kepler's laws of motion that there was no longer a mystery why the planet stars did what they did. There was completely, it wasn't just, oh, we've been studying for thousands of years and going back to the Babylonians, so we know eclipse will happen at this time. But now there was understanding. F equals GMM over R squared. You have Newton's law, you have Kepler's laws. And I wanted to point out, because I think this can help also, given the theme earlier about, religion and science and a perception of conflict. I'm not sure if you know this, Jeremy, but you realize that the Catholic Church and also many forms existing and forms of Christianity, have been vehemently against astrology. And the original logic was like, oh, it's evil from the devil. But now as a Catholic, the way I was taught is, oh, the reason why in the Old Testament says astrology is evil is because it's crap and it doesn't work. This is nonsense. But of course, the fundamentalist Christian would still say, oh, because it's evil and from the devil. But I was Jesuit educated, you should know. I went to a Jesuit high school. I'll throw that in there. Yeah. And so, but the way I was taught as a Catholic is like, we don't do astrology because it's crap and it doesn't work. And that's why God said, don't do it. Not because it's evil, but God was trying to encourage people, even in ancient times, don't waste your time on things that don't work. But there's this interesting separation, not just between astrometrics and astronomy, but then there was this historical divorce also between astronomy and astrology in science, when it already was there for centuries in the church, because the church was like, Bible says no to horoscopes and astrology. And then, so they were first on that front. The church was first. And then science caught up and it's like, yeah, astrology is, yeah. They caught up later. The church was actually ahead of its time on that front. The reason why I thought of it is because Father Corbally mentioned astrometrics, and it reminded me also other astro blank, insert a different suffix, also underwent separation over history.
So what happens when the observatory is not fully funded, the telescope itself is not fully funded by the Vatican in Tucson, and you're looking for donations? I don't want to get into a lot of fringe conversations, but here at UAPX, we become very beholden to the people who give us money, and we're bound by their directionality, their caveats, and their covenants in exchange for the funding. Does the church have override authority on that, or is the telescope itself and the operation of the telescope also beholden to the wishes of the donors?
Short answer, yes, it is. So we're a tax-exempt corporation incorporated in the state of Arizona. So yes, we have to follow the practice of such organizations. And yes, we follow donor wishes.
What happens when there is a conflict between donors' wishes, or is there conflict between donors' wishes and the church?
Well, you don't accept the donation. And the occasional, certainly, Jesuits who are principals of colleges have had to make that kind of decision. A donor wanting this, that, and the other, and the principal feeling, no, that's not appropriate. So thank you so much, but no, thank you.
If you're comfortable in answering the question, what would be a conflict for research between a donor and the church? What would the church say no to?
With our telescope, it would say no to, say, a specific military use.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I have great friends actually who are among the first users of our, telescope here in Arizona, who were in a college just nearby at the foot of the mountain, and they would bring students up, and they were wonderful users there. But then they moved to New Mexico and the university there, and got funding for a telescope. Actually, the mirror is the same size as what the mirror in the Hubble telescope, so it's a good sized mirror. And in order to aid their funding, part of it is funding by the military. And so that's fine. It's not a church telescope. That was the way they could get a telescope, and it's good doing good work. I won't say exactly what it's doing, but they don't know exactly what it's doing either. But that seems to be fine. Also, I suppose in the University of Arizona has been working with military on a common project to try and get around the fuzziness, the defocusing that the atmosphere makes for images of stars and galaxies. So, the image has to come down through the atmosphere, and there's turbulence, there's little thermal turbulence and so it defocuses the image, the sharp image of, say, a star, and the star ends up as a little blob rather than a single point, down at your telescope. Now, with a technique called adaptive optics, you can make that star come back to a point of light, or the galaxy in all its glory. Now, think of it the other way, so the military can look upwards and find out exactly what the satellites are looking like. So it's the same problem of, artificially stabilizing the atmosphere in order to get precise images. So it works both ways. And we've had University of Arizona people, working with military. So there's overlap there. It's not to say that the church is against military, but doesn't want to directly work with them. It just is not appropriate.
Sure, and completely understandable. Has there ever been any discovery that the Vatican Observatory has made that, I guess for lack of a better terminology, was like a rock being thrown in a pond? It created waves, and it made the church kind of take a step back and look at doctrine and say, were we wrong? Or has any discovery emboldened the doctrine more so than not with proof?
Yeah, this would be in astronomy in general. The Vatican Observatory itself has not made shattering discoveries. We've participated in various things, but not of itself. But I'd always expect science to bring challenges. Yes, I'd say that genetics has brought challenges and that understanding, but it's always opening up one's eyes. Initially you say, "Gosh, what?" and then incorporating. Let me do a little kind of almost personal plug. So you mentioned that I've co-authored a book on the emergence of religion in human evolution.
Mhm.
So, this is actually, it's not so much theology, religion, as science answering, how do we come to have a capacity for religion? So rather than looking at the religion itself, how do we, we humans, how do we have that capacity? And the answer is through, wondrous, means of science. And a lot of genetics is there, actually particular genes that make us, capable of kind of imagining the not purely physical, the beyond, the be able to, think beyond the purely what's right in front of us. And the whole way of imagining and contemplating. So this is a matter of science. So initially one say, oh, genetics, no, that must be terrible. It challenges, God's action. Actually, no. It's fascinating to find how God can work through the progress of nature, the path of nature in evolution, to make us who are capable of incredible things, including a capacity for religion.
Interesting.
Jeremy, I've been waiting for you to ask that question because I knew you were going to, and I think one critical thing to be aware of is that a religion and a doctrine can be very robust if it avoids what is known as the God of the gaps. Guy Consolmano, Guy mentions this in many of his books, and I talked about it. Basically, if you say God is responsible for lightning, and now we understand how lightning works, then you've got a problem. But if you are, I know the counter argument, the devil's advocate counter argument to what I'm about to say is, oh, well, if you make your religion vague enough, anything works. But I'm being sincere, of course, that as long as it's, you say God created the universe, but you do not say how, then you avoid the kind of situation you're talking about, Jeremy. There are still things you've got like evolution, genetics, as Father Corbally was saying. But you asked the question about two ways. You said, what about discoveries that shore things up? And I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the 1950s, Pope Pius the 12th said that it was not a doctrinal proclamation. Be very careful. He didn't say this ex cathedra, but basically he said that the Big Bang Theory was awesome, and he gave it 2 thumbs up. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Big Bang Theory was created by a Catholic priest, actually, a Belgian by the name of Father Georges-Henri Lemaitre. I probably butchered his name because I don't speak French, but my wife does. It's got the funny eye with the caret triangle on it. But basically, a Catholic priest invented the Big Bang Theory. I'm going to let that sink in for a moment in case you didn't know that. And
I had no idea.
You had no idea. You know why?
Yeah.
Because the media is not going to tell you that because it doesn't play into the narrative of religion and science being enemies. It doesn't play into that narrative.
Well,
it's a historical fact that gets buried. You're not going to find it in many textbooks. And Albert Einstein gets credit when you're going to love this. Albert Einstein despised the Big Bang Theory because he, despite everyone thinking he believed in God, I think the evidence is really he was more agnostic. He thought the Big Bang Theory was a disaster, was terrible because he believed the universe was eternal, and he fudged his equations to make sure the universe was eternal, because if the universe is eternal, you don't need God.
Well, so that's what goes back to my idea that it's very difficult for a person to separate their personal beliefs from the bias of the report. And if Einstein is fudging mathematical
equations,
if he's fudging equations based on his belief, then I'm kind of full circle again back to whom do I trust to have the unadulterated pure truth of a discovery.
That doesn't exist. We're not Vulcans. We're not all Commander Spock and his compatriots. All science and religion, every human endeavor has bias. So we can never eliminate bias. What we do is we mitigate it through things like blind peer review of our scientific publications. But on the Big Bang Theory, I also have to add that, because you're asking discoveries that shore up religious doctrine, because the Big Bang Theory was the first time, to my knowledge, and Father Corbally can correct me if I'm mistaken, that the church's doctrine of creation ex nihilo, from nothing, actually had scientific evidence. Every other culture's creation myth is that there was some primordial soup or whatever that the god or gods reformed order into chaos. And even in the Old Testament of the Bible, it says, the Spirit of God flew over the waters. What waters? He hadn't created them yet. But the Catholic doctrine was that God created the universe ex nihilo, from nothing. And the destruction of what was called the steady state theory, which was the big counter to Big Bang, with the discovery of the cosmic microwave background in the 1960s, really sort of killed off the idea that the universe had no beginning. We now know the universe is aged to like 5 decimal places. I mean, it's crazy. Like,
well, this universe anyway.
This universe anyway. Yes, we know the precision. When I was a child, we argued about whether the universe was 5 or 20 billion years old. Now we know it's 13.799. It's absolutely incredible. But it amazes me, though, how the strange dichotomies we have in the country and in the world, that originally the Big Bang Theory was decried as, oh, that's religious. That's awful. That sounds like religion. We can't have this. And many astronomers like Fred Hoyle, not just Albert Einstein, said they poo-pooed it and said, oh, we can't have this. This sounds like religion. And now in modern day, you have in America people saying, what? The universe is only 6,000 years old. Ever Big Bang Theory is great. It's like we've come full circle. Right. Yesterday's controversy becomes today's dogma. Yesterday's dogma becomes today's controversy. You just come full circle.
Fascinating. Good, Matthew. You expressed that well. I'd also throw a little bomb in there. And yet, St. Augustine, whom you very rightly quoted earlier, could cope with a universe that didn't have any beginning. I need to go back into the passage and understand it more myself, but that's my strong understanding of someone who is with us and sadly died prematurely, Father Bill Steger, our cosmologist, and he'd point out Augustine, could cope with a universe without a beginning.
Yes, no, but that was my point earlier about the God of the gaps. So even if the Big Bang Theory was disproven, or it turns out the universe didn't have a beginning, we can still cope with that. I agree. I totally agree. I have to go look up that passage again. Yeah.
So religious scientific principles, or scientific religious principles, whichever way you have it, do you feel that there is almost a caste or a class system to that, where the upper echelons of the church have a more flexible ideology or dogma to them, and then as you proceed further down to the ground level, you have more fundamentalists and evangelicals who are much more literal and potentially public relation wise damaging to the overall view of the church?
There's security in literalism.
There's also ignorance or bliss in ignorance.
Yes, exactly. But, and the problem with, the more understanding is it opens up the questions, as Matthew and I know, and you too, Jeremy, in science. The more you delve into something, the more questions you have. In a sense, the more uncertainty you have, at heart of things. We've not got to the fundamentals of, fundamental physics yet. And I had a wonderful enthusiast a couple of days ago talking about how magnetic resonance was going to, transform our whole understanding. Well, yeah, we've had theories of everything, and the answer is 42. You know, the reference there, but no, without denigrating the power of magnetic resonance, to find the whole answer is always, happily, it's beyond science. Today's science, tomorrow's science, the next day's science. That's the nature of things, always to be asking. So a scientist can't be a fundamentalist because there's always questions to ask. It's essentially a shifting territory. The things, yes, we can establish. Again, Matthew, to quote your hero, Brother Guy, he'll hold up a science textbook and the Bible and say, look, the Bible's not going to change. This textbook is out of the window in 10 years, even less, and we'll have to write it again.
Yeah, there's there's a comfort in certainty. I actually have a couple concrete examples of what you just stated, Jeremy. I didn't learn very much history of science, but I did at least get a liberal arts education, a good Jesuit education. But one great example of what you're talking about, okay? Great example about hierarchy and differences. In the Middle Ages, any learned individual knew it was obvious the Earth was spherical. That we already knew the size of the Earth with a 2% error.
Sure.
Going back to the ancient Greeks, okay? But ask Joe Sixpack in medieval Europe, they're going to say the Earth is flat. Of course they will, right? Yeah. So like that's a great example. A modern example of that is I personally know people, and it pains me deep inside, but I know tons of people. Unfortunately, it's tons. Unfortunately, it's not a small number who, including Catholics, my fellow members of my religion, who are like, the Pope says, COVID is serious, get a vaccine. And I know people who are like, oh, vaccines, I'm not getting that. Oh, the Pope said so. Pope's a communist, I don't have to listen to him. These are Catholics saying this to me. And it pains me deep inside to hear that. It really does. And it does, as you said, it does, if people like that are outspoken, like on social media and stuff, it does massive damage. It does do some damage to the church, and it really hurts when that. It hurts me when that happens. But I see it even today. But you have to distinguish one thing, Jeremy, is that religion is not a monolithic thing. There's Catholicism, but there's a bajillion flavors of Christianity. So there are differing degrees of what you would term fundamentalism, and in my experience, Catholicism is still very low on that scale. Recent 2 years, it seems like there's been an increase, at least locally, where I've been in American Catholics on that spectrum. But I think that to Catholicism's credit, I think we have at least recently been pretty far from that, with the exceptions I just said of people I know. But I still think that in general, you need to distinguish not just hierarchy down in the church, but also realize there's so many different flavors of Christianity: Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, Evangelical, which you said, that's a religion. That's not a part of Catholicism. So you have to distinguish, there's Baptist, and then, what kind of Baptist? Are you Southern Baptist? Are you this? So you have to be careful. There's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of spectrum. It's not binary either. Oh, I'm pro-science and anti-science.
Yeah, and
it's not binary either. Yeah.
I think a lot of the problem is social media and aspects of, say, like Twitter, where we're compressed down to 180 characters. We can't be that specific when we have a propensity for generalization anyway. We're compressing our generalizations down. But I'm impressed with what I'm hearing now, because I did come in here today with some very preconceived ideas. I have some very, very deep questions, which I can't get into for reasons that we've discussed previously, which I would hope that at some point in time, Father, we would be able to breach those subjects and have those discussions, because it does go into the ideas of doctrine versus evangelical versus military versus popular culture and things like that. And I'm very interested to be able to explore those ideas, but hopefully another day. What is a hope or a desire of the Vatican in the operation of the observatory? And I don't mean in grandiose general terms. I mean, like in a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, 50 years from now, what is the Vatican projecting that the observatory will be able to provide to the world?
Good science. Now, not spectacular front page science, but there's a lot of sort of building bricks that are always needed. What our telescope here in Arizona can do, it's a very modest size, but it can, keep observing objects, or doing surveys, which is the fundamental. You find things out by doing surveys and then finding interesting objects within those surveys. Or you find things out by staying on an object, month by month or whatever it is, year by year, and seeing the changes and trying to understand them. So it's this kind of, sort of fundamental building block astronomy that I think our telescope and our presence here, can contribute, and has been doing so all along.
A personal question for you, Father. I live a few hours west of you. I'm based in Las Vegas. Would it be possible at some point in time, early next year, for me to visit, or anybody to visit the observatory? How would I go about being able to take a tour or set foot on the observatory and introduce my 8-year-old daughter to the idea that religion is not separate from science?
Yeah. So what I distinguish a little bit, we're all known as the Vatican Observatory, but where our telescope is so kind of another matter. But yes, so it's on Mount Graham, which is at an elevation of 10,500 feet. So in winter, this is a real problem. It's like being in sort of Canada, well up in Canada for the amount of snow. So the Forest Service, on whose ground is our telescope, as well as the other 2 telescopes there on Mount Graham. The Forest Service closes access to visitors in the wintertime, which is about November through to the certainly end of April into May. But in the summer period, then we welcome visitors through Eastern Arizona College, which runs the it's now Discovery Park. That's the name of it. Discovery Park. So if you looked up Discovery Park, Eastern Arizona College, you'll see there how visitors are accommodated and can get a wonderful tour in the summer periods. The last 2 seasons, for good pandemic reasons, we haven't been able to have the tours. Hopefully they can begin again, next summer, say late May. But it's lovely to do that. Access, as I say, is a bit of a trick. The last 2 miles is single lane, so that's why people have to go up in a minivan. But they have wonderful guides there, whom we train, bring up to date each year on what's going on, and they're great enthusiasts. Yeah,
How much time? Well, thank you. I would love to be able to take a look at it. And like I said, I'm raising an 8-year-old daughter, and she is extremely scientifically minded. Her mother is we're divorced. Her mother is raising her in a religious aspect. I am raising her in a science aspect, and I would love for her to set foot somewhere that would allow her to mentally bridge that gap, because I don't think that separately we're imperfect.
Your driving distance, I think, from the Vatican.
Oh yeah, I can drive to Tucson in just a few hours.
Yeah, it's just great.
Yeah, and my vehicle, Father, is a very capable off-road vehicle that again we won't get into, but it could climb to the top with or without a road.
Well, okay, maybe you'd have to do. But the thing is the access and what the Forest Service wants how to do that. So done through Discovery Park.
Discovery Park, fair enough.
Yeah.
How much time do you spend at the telescope?
Relatively little. It'll be 4 or 5 nights. Maybe 3 times a year. But one of our number, Father Rich Boyle, he's up whenever he can, so it's he spends a long time. He has colleagues, particularly in Lithuania, and they're doing
I'm
fine
I'm
surveys.
half Lithuanian. There are almost no Lithuanians.
Oh, so is that your name?
Yeah, yeah. There's like 3 million Lithuanians on the planet. Yeah, I'm half Lithuanian, half
Oh,
Polish.
well, that's wonderful.
What do you know?
Well, super. No, so the wonderful team that he's been working with, and I've done a certain amount. His area is, the brightnesses of stars, so photometry. Mine is spectroscopy, so the rainbows of stars. But I have collaborated a bit with them in order to check what they're finding in through their photometry or brightnesses actually is the same as I can see in the spectra. So I've done a little collaboration with that group and know them. So yeah.
Interesting.
It's international. And there's a Polish Jesuit who's part of the team and has been for years.
Did you say Polish?
Yes.
Yeah, man, that's great.
So Matthew, when I drive my vehicle over to Tucson, are you hopping in and taking a ride with me?
Yeah, well, you have to go to Safford. Safford is the place to think of, which is a couple of hours from Tucson. But around Tucson, there, of course, one of the wonders around Tucson, of course, are these nighttime visits for visits. So both on Kitt Peak, the National Observatory, and then run on Mount Lemmon, just north of Tucson, run by the University of Arizona. There are visitor nights, and they're just wonderful experiences there. So I can
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be lovely to combine that and visit to Mount Graham. Gosh.
I would love to take a look.
Yeah, and I've never visited the observatory or you, Jeremy. I should combine that into something.
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
future. Combine that, yeah.
Absolutely. And Father, I won't ask if you ever make it out to Vegas, but if you do, please let me know.
The city of sin.
I've dropped off my sister and her husband in Vegas. They were getting a plane over, I think, to San Francisco. So that's about it. I just visited the Grand Canyon. So yeah, I know Vegas.
You're not missing much.
And the nice straight road back, to Tucson.
Yeah, it's very straight. I have to admit that my questions have fallen off because of your answers have invalidated a lot of the questions that I was going to ask, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
Now you got to become Catholic again. Now you've got to come back.
I have a very long road ahead of me before
I'll convince you. I'll work on you. It'll be your spiritual journey back to the faith.
What I can say is I absolutely love the fact that a lot of the misconceptions that I held regarding the church and science were dispelled in the last 63 minutes, which I think just having this type of conversation, I think is extremely important. And I do believe that the church has a public relations problem, because this message that we're having this discussion today, it reaches virtually no one. And, there was even a comment from one of the viewers that said that the message hadn't gotten to him. And I'm wondering, Father, what outreach other than ministry? Because I think that when an approach is made to an agnostic or an atheist, when you're wearing the collar, it's somebody immediately crosses their arms and goes into the defense mode. How can the church reach out to the populace at large with a scientific message and be able to bridge that gap without coming across as being pious?
Well, obviously, one of the ways is we talk about our science, and that I've done many ways. This time of the year, I'll happily talk about, the Star of Bethlehem, the Christmas star, which includes science, as well as, faith and religion. And it's a curious mixture. And in the end, everyone has to make up their own mind based on the data.
Sure.
So it's I enjoy talking about, say, something like that, because it does bring in the two aspects. I remember one glorious occasion just north of Tucson to an astronomy club with kind of an extended that had a relationship with a music society there. So we had a wonderful piano recital to the most glorious pictures taken by one of the people who was running the public tours up on Mount Lemmon, and just a fantastic photographer. So that was a wonderful combination of art there. And then I kind of contributed, thoughts about the Christmas star with some slides and things afterwards. It was a glorious afternoon.
That's incredible. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, and my apologies if this is a taboo topic or not, but would there ever be cause for the observatory to make a discovery that the church does not provide to the general public, and it ends up in a tome in the secret library somewhere? Is that something that would occur?
There's nothing in science that we could be afraid of. This is God's creation. Why, how could we be afraid of that?
That is a fantastic answer.
Scientists used to be, before they became majority atheists or whatever, scientists used to be inspired by religion, looking for, as Father Corbally said, evidence of God's creativity, for example.
Da Vinci.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like how many great scientists and engineers were religious? This whole scientists are mostly atheists thing is mostly a 19th, 20th century phenomenon. Before that, scientists didn't have a problem discovering germs, discovering stars, galaxies. There wasn't a problem. Things like you brought up with Galileo earlier, we're the exception, not the rule. We're not the general thing. And people and scientists themselves were inspired by religion to be like, look at the wonders of God creation. Look at these crazy things that God has created in biology and physics and chemistry and astronomy and geology, everywhere.
Genetics, Abbot Gregor Mendel.
Exactly.
Who is actually better known for his meteorology, his prediction of local weather, than he was for his, how the various, the breeding of things went on. And so, father of genetics.
He was a pioneer before DNA, decades before DNA was discovered. Yes. He was a pioneer. Yeah.
How does somebody donate to the observatory, to the telescope?
Well, lovely. Go to the website, Vatican Observatory, all one word, .org. And it'll tell you about
observatory.org.
Yep.
Let me get this down here so that the viewers can take a look at it. I believe right there.
That's fair. Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, there are all kinds of stuff there. There's various blogs and things, and how can you can sign on to get regular blogs and even participate in monthly full moon conversations.
Can people request to use the telescope or have access to the telescope? And how does one partner with a research opportunity with the Vatican?
Well, it would be professional astronomers, and we have collaborations such as Rich and the Lithuanians. The other thing is that it's part owned by the University of Arizona. So fact of the three state universities in Arizona have access. The faculty have access to it.
Fantastic. Father, I won't take up any more of your time. We've gone over the hour limit here. If there's anything else that you would like to state or express on behalf of the church, the Vatican, or the observatory separately, please feel free to do so.
Well, just to thank you, Jeremy, for this opportunity, this wonderful conversation with Matthew as well, and just to say, yeah, we're on a journey.
We are
Wonderful.
Absolutely on a journey. And hopefully that journey will allow us to have the other conversation at some point in time.
Exactly.
Father Corbally, Professor Shadagis, thank you both for joining me. This has been an amazing conversation, and I hope, Father, you don't mind if I do keep in touch.
Be lovely. Good,
Thank you.
Jeremy. Look forward to
It was
Fantastic.
nice, Father Corbally. It was great to great to meet you,
and you too.
virtually meet you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's way nowadays.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if there's ever any positive discoveries that that the observatory makes, feel free to call me and we can talk about it.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen, I thank you for your time. I'm going to take you out of the show now and wish you all the best and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
To everyone, Merry Christmas.
Merry.
Merry Christmas. All right, that wraps up episode 3 of the O.S.I.R.I.S project. Thank you again to Father Corbally and Professor Shadagas for their time, expertise, and I'm going to be taking a small break between now and the first of the year. So this is the last episode of 2021. Come January 2022, I will be back with more interviews, more live shows, more information, and more science. Anyway, have fun, enjoy, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, God bless.